I didn't get many.
Okay, that's fine.
And we are live. Welcome to the second in a series of 1,000 conferences that we're going to have on the topic of Harpoon.
Waiter.
You didn't think you signed up for that, but there you go.
I think I need something stronger to drink.
All right, so welcome again to Chris Carlson and Larry Bond of the Admiralty Trilogy group. We're going to keep it to kind of light and frothy here. We're going to talk a little bit. I kind of reframed your original topic of anti-ship cruise missiles to, I know you wanted to discuss why you did what you did in Harpoon 5, but I don't know if we want to frame that a little bit more around maybe a little bit of the history of how it's been dealt in the series, just a slight bit, kind of lead into that. So we'll talk about that for a little bit. Then we'll lead into a topic that I'm very interested in is Sonobuoy discussion. We're going to discuss a very typical situation, but as Chris will point out that, it's a little bit of a hairy situation. So we'll kind of get into that. So let's just dive right on in. Towards the end, we will open the floor for Q&A, and usually we get some interesting questions during that. I didn't get too many pre-questions. Maybe before the next conference, I'll open up something a little bit more direct to request questions ahead of time. So let's just jump right in. Chris and Larry, I don't know if you want to just kind of frame within the Harpoon series how anti-ship cruise missiles have been handled, and we'll go from there. Just go for it.
Chris, you want me to start? I can talk about what we did with the first few editions, which was basically handling the mechanics of anti-ship cruise missiles. When Harpoon was first published in 1980, there weren't that many of them out there, and we didn't know that much about the Russian ones. But it was all about launching them, showing how they moved, and then there's a chance they're decoyed, which really wasn't addressed very much at all in the first edition. And then, boom, they hit or miss and just fly off into the ether. I'm not even sure the first edition included rules for reattack.
Nope,
Chris,
you didn't have reattack back then.
Nope. I mean, this stuff was also new, and really, Harpoon has been about my understanding of how cruise missiles work and how naval warfare works in general, growing and trying to share what I've learned in successive editions of the rules. It wasn't until really the most recent 5th edition where we've changed the basic method by which they're targeted. As late as the 4th, you could get an ESM crossfix, now called ES, and that was sufficient to launch. And unless it was a very high-speed target and you were firing at long range, you stood a fair chance to hit what you were aiming at. That has now changed because we understand that the targeting process is much more complex. And I hate to use the word paradigm shift because it's such jargon, but it really fits. Paradigm means where you have to put the effort to make it work. Before, it was just about detecting the guy. No, it's harder than that. The effort is in putting together an idea of who he is, what he is, where exactly he's going, and where you can put a weapon to hit him. And that has made the game, I regret to say, more complex, but also much more realistic. Chris was really the instigator of this, and I think the game is better for the result. Chris, you want to talk about how you came up with the idea of even doing this, the fire control targeting process?
It really came up when I had a dinner with Norman Friedman. When I lived in Virginia, Norm and I would normally get together at least 3-4 times a year when he came down to go to the archives or he was giving a briefing or something. And he would always call me and say, hey, I'm going to be in town. Now he calls me to whine that I'm not in town. But we started talking about some of the big points, which for God's sakes are in his footnotes or endnotes in Sea Power and Space, where he goes, he was the first Western author to start talking about the Russian targeting complexes. And that book came out, I think, in 2000. I got it, like most Friedman books, within, light seconds of it being available. And I started and I always read his footnotes, as much as I hate to read Norm's footnotes.
Well, they're in 5-point type. Why would you
do that? They're wee font. But he has so much stuff in there. You've got to read his endnotes. There's as much information in the endnotes as there are in the body of the book, which is why the 5-point font makes me just curls my hair. I'm just, because it's hard to read. It really is. But he was citing Russian sources. And interestingly enough, 2 of them I had. So I went and grabbed them and, I'd scan them and then put them through Google Translate and I'd start finding terms. So I started searching for those terms on Russian websites, and oh my God, Pandora's box didn't open, it exploded. And you get a real good discussion about why they were very interested in these things. And then you backstop that against, again, Norman Friedman's book, Network-Centric Warfare, where he goes through the debacle of anti-ship Tomahawk. Because when you read it, the Navy made the assumption, well, we'll just pull the information out of the ether. It's really what it gets down to. Because they originally were looking at satellites, the White Cloud Complex, until the Navy actually sat down with a calculator and figured out that was unaffordable. So they started looking at different HFDF, aircraft sightings and whatnot. And they were all going to put this into this lovely cloud-like system, if you will. And then they would pull out targeting information, except that what they got wasn't targetable information. Yet good track information, but not targeting information. And that's what really pulled it out, that the localization part of what we call the DCL curve, detection, classification, localization, is much, much harder. And I started weighing that against what my experience was with passive target motion analysis with sonars. And good Lord, it took us hours. If the target was like 10,000, 11,000 yards away, it took us over an hour to get a basic fire control system solution. So this just said to me, this is a lot harder than we've ever talked about. It's a lot harder than anybody else except for Dr. Friedman has talked about. So I guess we're missing something.
The way I've reconciled myself to this whole business of having to come up with a fire control solution for surface-to-surface missiles is to look at a surface search radar will detect a surface contact. But if you want to shoot at that guy, you need a fire control radar to do it. Same thing with an air search radar, and we have fire control radars for surface-to-air missiles. Well, there's no radar equivalent for surface-to-surface missiles. Instead, you've got to develop this very precise solution that's going to put the missile in the basket, so when the seeker pops on, it actually has the target you intended in front of it.
I'm assuming during all this, in reality, that are the systems providing you a reasonable indication of the probability? Like, are you, like, of course, in game terms, we're getting a poor, a fair, or a good, but systematically, how are you advised that you have a reasonable solution, or are you always in some forms guessing?
You're guessing.
Okay.
It's an educated guess, and the longer you go, the more refined the guess becomes.
When what you do is you make an estimate, you plug it in, and then you track the target, and is it matching your predicted behavior? The same thing actually you do for gunnery. I mean, you want to match the target's course and speed, and there's a predictor that says that this is where he's supposed to be, and you can look at that difference. It's the same thing with this business, except you have to do it yourself.
And even with active radar, particularly over the horizon, most radars, their beam widths are too big. So you're not getting a good enough localization. You've got good detection, you've got good track. You don't have good targeting. And that's what really the Russians talked about when they started doing the Titanite Dubrava and then on up into Monolith and Mineral, is that you look at their specifications that they advertise. And yeah, I know it's an advertised thing, but the thing is it's consistent with their history and consistent within their systems. They have damn fine bearings. I mean, active radar for Mineral is 1/4 of a degree. And then you put that on top of some of the articles that came out in the late 80s, early 90s, where, and it was in, I think, Naval Forces, where the Germans said you need less than 1 degree accuracy for a targeting complex, to get a targeting solution. And that jived so well with what the Russians were saying that at that point I'm going, if the Russians say it and the Germans say it and we can't do it with what we got, then it's probably right. So when we talk about, and I know people have grexed about the salvo thing, here's the point. You have no clue really as to how accurate your solution is. It's the best you're going to get. You have some great algorithms to help kind of crank things through, but that's the best you have. And because you have to saturate the contact, if you're going to try to get through in a modern air defense system, you can't spread your missiles out. So they're being fired on essentially the same solution, which is why we went down the all or nothing approach, is because that's what you're doing. You're firing everything on a solution that you have precious little to tell you just how good it is. So yeah, and I understand the frustration. So there are some things we can do. For example, Larry and I I think we put out somewhere, we've talked about it, that you can actually shoot in groups of 4 if you want, because there's enough time separation within a total turn. But I would discourage rolling for each individual missile. This is not a torpedo salvo that you're intentionally spreading. You're firing on a solution to get as many missiles through the air defense system. And firing individually guarantees you're not going to get much.
So the only possible benefit to that, potentially, that I've seen in some of the scenarios that we've played through, is there a possibility that, I think what I've found is about 4 missiles per salvo is, at least in game play out, seems to be about the sweet point. Now, if you have a certain amount of time delay between your salvos, are you not, in some respects, with your first salvo, giving the enemy enough to think about that it cannot think about the additional salvo? And then
it can.
Go ahead. Okay.
It can. In fact, in our OTC game I ran for the University of Minnesota, one of the squads had the most unstinking, believably bad situation. They had a bunch of subsonic cruise missiles come over the horizon. They were well targeted, and they started engaging. As the missiles got halfway, the supersonic missiles came over their horizon, and they were so screwed. And I ran it both ways because I wanted to show them something. I had them engage keep engaging the subsonics and then shift. And they still took, out of the 8 YJ-12s, they took 4. But I then switched it and went after the YJ-12s, and then they took 6 YJ-62s. Because even though they're slower, you're focusing on the supersonic ones almost to the exclusion, and there was nothing they could do because they got so focused on what they had detected first and was a known threat. Let's face it, you had 24 YJ-62s coming in. This should get your attention. And they started shooting them, and then 8 YJ-12s just scream over the horizon. It was a bad day.
So that was a pretty narrow degree of difference there. But I've seen other situations, or thought about other situations where if you can time a salvo to get to a certain range from a certain degree, and if you have forces that can come from enough of an offset, then you start to gain a lot of that, some of the probability increasing of hitting from them not being able to off bear their surface air missiles. So there's so many different combinations, but
that's one of the advantages of waypoints. If you want to get fancy, but really, if you're getting really fancy on that, I've used waypoints more to screw around with their mind as to where I am versus trying to saturate their defenses, because having more in one section tends to focus their mind. And many times they're not putting all their directors on it immediately. But if it's coming from two directions, they don't know where I am, which I think is a very good thing.
Very good point. Good point. Yeah. I haven't seen too many players using waypoints. It could be that I haven't emphasized it to them, but it could be quite interesting.
They're hard. To use a waypoint, you really have to know where your target is.
Yes, absolutely.
We could almost make a rule for that. You can't waypoint on a poor solution or a very early launch.
I think
they'll figure it out.
Do that anyway.
Yeah.
So, but I know there's been some talk on the Facebook side about why did we do that, and it's largely forcing through game mechanics, which Larry and I really don't like doing. We don't like hamstringing people unless we absolutely think it's necessary, and this is one of those times we think it's necessary. So, 4-weapon salvos. If you want to do that, that's fine. I think, in fact, I've even said that's an alternative method. I would not encourage something smaller than 3 or 4.
We've had some successful hits on 2 missile salvos, but that's because of horrible rolling. So,
on whose side?
You're looking at them.
Victim number 1, please stand up.
Is there anything else you would like to bring up on?
I think that's really the big point, because this whole fire control thing has, as you've seen, is really focused a lot of the talk, both Facebook and the questions that we receive. It's brand new. As Larry says, it's a paradigm change. As much as I hate Dilbertisms, it is fundamentally a huge shift in how we do things, because in reality, the targeting process is the problem. Shooting's easy.
Yeah, if you know where he is, you can kill him. That's always, that has been a tenet of naval warfare forever. It's how you get to that point. And what's interesting about the fire control solution rules is that some techniques and some naval tactics, which didn't make a lot of sense before, all of a sudden drop into place, and you understand, oh, that's why they're doing it this way. So it's cements my confidence that that we are giving people an accurate model of naval warfare.
Yeah. It gets back to what Captain Wayne Hughes talked about. Firing effectively first. And the effective part is the targeting process.
Very good. I've kind of opened the floor for questions from the crowd in regards to that segment. Here, let me see if I can promote this question. Oop. a second. Let me show this. All right. So one question from my friend Mark Hitchcock. How much does EW affect or play into this process?
Is he talking about EW in terms of ES, or is he talking about electronic countermeasures, do you think?
Mark,
Mark,
do you want
what
to?
are you concerned with?
Hopefully you heard that. It takes about 30 seconds or so.
Well, while we're waiting, electronic warfare has grown dramatically within the Harpoon combat system. We've made it harder to detect now with jamming. We've made it harder to hit with countermeasures. That's the whole reason why we went down the generation side, because we had to find a way to have the measure, countermeasure, what Garkov called the military dialectic of technology involved. And so, yes, electronic warfare is huge because we have a number of examples where soft kill was almost 100% effective in many cases. The Arab-Israeli war, 51 to 54 Styx missiles fired without a hit. That's a pretty darn good record. And we know the Israelis did an awful lot in EW. If you haven't read The Boats of Cherbourg by Abraham Rabinovich, you really need to get a hold of that one. I think the Naval Institute still sells it. It is the history of anti-ship cruise missile EW defense. And it's a wonderful story.
And Mark had highlighted it was for countermeasures.
There's a lot in there.
There was a change, actually, one change. I mean, countermeasures is a step in the defensive process. And any Navy that can possibly afford even decoys will glue decoys on a ship because it matters. It helps. Now, it used to be in the first through third editions, you rolled for decoys before doing other stuff. And instead, no, check. Decoys was after defensive fire. And in the fourth edition, we just, again, getting smarter, decoys happen further out before you get into defensive gun range. I mean, basically, you're giving the missile a target that it likes more than you. So it goes off and attacks that. And so you don't have to waste your defensive fire on that missile. So we actually changed it from a missile hit table to a missile lock-on table, and then comes defensive fire. And that's been further refined in the current air defense model that we have in the fifth edition. But decoys, I can't even tell you how much it matters in terms of defense. We've got a scenario we're setting up that'll be in the next SIDREP. And on one side, you've got East German patrol boats firing first-gen missiles at West German patrol boats who are fitted with second-gen decoys. That's going to have a serious effect on their ability to hit with those earlier missiles. On the other hand, the Germans have the West Germans, I should say, have second-gen Exocet missiles, and they're firing it at missile boats that don't even have decoys. So it's a layer of defense that's just as vital as your guns or your SAMs.
And it's really, that whole process was what drove the point defense range of 4 nautical miles. So that, because even a Styx missile sees out to about 6 or 7. So we do the lock-on or the to-hit roll before we even get into the point defense band. And that's where those ranges kind of got biased towards.
The way I describe it to the players is they roll their lock-on rolls, and I say, okay, these missiles are going to hit you unless you shoot them down. They will hit. There's no other thing that's going to happen. They have seen you, and they are destined for you.
We have a couple other quick questions here.
Okay.
How do waypoints affect the fire control solution? I think we kind of hinted at.
They don't.
Yeah.
Right now,
the fire control solution basically allows you to use the waypoints. Waypoints are so you can get fancy. So you can dogleg to hide your position. A lot of times, waypoints were required because we had to fly around things that were kind of in the way, like land, an island. So you could fly around that. But waypoints do not impact the fire control solution. But the fire control solution, if you don't have a good solution, doesn't matter if you've got waypoints, you're probably going to miss.
Let me find to see if there's any that were. Here's one from Connor. He's one of my players in my Pining for the Fjords scenario. His specific question is: with a ship with only 4 harpoons, is it still sensible to just dump all 4 in one salvo?
Absolutely. You should go find his friends. You should go find other folks to play with and bring them along. 4 is not. I mean, I hate to say it, but against a modern air defense system, that's not going to do much. That's why I'm wondering why they're putting Harpoon back on U.S. Navy.
Yeah, I just saw that yesterday.
Well,
maybe our submariner can give us a lightness on that.
You know what the original reason why we had them? It's because we couldn't shoot small guys with a Mark 48. The early Mark 48s couldn't see small guys.
Oh.
So a Grisha was a problem.
And a Harpoon would definitely settle a Grisha's hash.
Yes. Basically, right now, against a modern air defense system, 2 to 4 harpoons are going to do absolutely squat. I mean, let's just talk about, say, an Type 052C. It's got the equivalent of an SAN-6 battery. It's got, point defense guns. I mean, come on, really? 4? We're not even making the HQ-9 break a sweat.
In our
maybe they're thinking of even like a Type 054 or a 056.
Yeah, they've got RAM equivalent. So
where we were in our scenarios, I'll give some framing to this. In our scenarios, I was intermixing some older vessels, some Kravak 1 and Kravak 2s, where they were not older, but they were less capable from a SAM perspective, especially their radar limitations were roughly 18 nautical miles and so forth. So we had situations where a 2 salvo Harpoon were getting all the way through because they were at best getting 1 short or point blank firing, if that, and then because of the combat system adjustments to timing, in many of these situations, the older Soviet vessels were not picking up on the harpoons as they were coming in. So let me frame it. We're August of 1987, so we're kind of like right on the cusp, and I was using purposefully. I was using a mix of slightly older vessels on both sides.
That's what the player needs to think about then. So this is a good look. You've got a Russian system that has minimal detection range. It's got a point defense SAM, which in 1987 was at best a partial sea skimming capability, maybe?
Right.
And then it had guns. Big guns, not even small guns.
Right.
So a 2-weapon salvo on a Krivak may be justified, but a 2-weapon salvo on, say, a Crested 2 or a Kara may not be justified. You'll have to shoot more.
Yeah, oddly enough, in our scenario, they took out a Sobremny, which was right next to them, right? Which was right next to the Krivaks and the Uruloy. So the ship that probably would have helped them was already taken out systematically. They had a CIC hit, but
like the golden BB. There's nothing to do about that.
So I'll have a whole talk on that at some point. That scenario was pretty fun. I just want to make sure I didn't miss any other specific to that topic. I will go back through these questions, y'all, and re-ask the ones that aren't specific to this area. I think I've gotten everything. Let me show this. Let's see. Mark, I'm going to come back to your second question here in a little bit. All right. So at this point, we will move on to a topic we slowly got into in our last scenario, as I've crept into the rules as we've moved through my campaign. Very much a learning process on my part. So sonobuoys. I'm going to show a very simple but at least often used by myself in scenario design situation. Let me see if I can share my screen here. Okay. Hopefully this. Okay. So are you able to see my screen now?
Yes, I see some barriers.
Yeah, that's for my next talk. That's for my talk later at noon. Sorry, I thought I had this up. I know exactly where it's at. Sonobuoy resolution example. All right, so this is the scenario I kind of gave you a snapshot of in the email. So we have in this scenario, we can kind of adjust the equipment here to match what we're trying to highlight. But we have USS Simpson, OH Perry, small size frigate. We have at Block 0 SH-60B Seahawk, given a call sign Hawk 1. I've kind of placed out where we're intending to put a sonobuoy pattern, but Chris, I'll let you kind of speak to where things are and so forth as we go through this. And I threw out the K-480 Akula 1 subsurface nuclear attack unit here. And let me just open the floor to you, Chris. I know you already had some thoughts about what the Seahawk would do in this situation. Let me maximize this a little bit. So,
how fast is that Akula going?
I had it going 15 knots.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, how'd you get 9.5 miles?
Oh, this is the bearing range markers here. So that's how far. This is the distance to the Akula from where the center of the pattern.
Okay.
Yeah. We can move them closer.
My first question is what gave you the initial detection on the Akula?
Because that was going to be my question.
Oh, we don't know. We don't necessarily know he's there.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, I'm just showing it.
Then let me go to the philosophical discussion we had earlier.
Okay.
U.S. or more correctly, Western sonobuoys are almost never just thrown out there. They're thrown on a known target. That's why the U.S. puts so much money into SOSUS. We put so much money into CERTAS. We just don't go out and throw them in the water. Sonobuoys are largely a reacquisition and localization system. Now, on the flip side, the Russians assign areas to maritime patrol aircraft, and they lay humongous sonobuoy fields. I didn't go into it in the rules because it is so foreign, so different than what the West does. It requires really its own SITREP article. So where a Seahawk would go running down a line of bearing off the Totorei, which in this case, I guess would be about 15 knots. We're talking maybe about 8 or 9, not even that. No, we're talking about, about 8 miles. That's really about as far away as it's going to see in the Akula because they're so damn quiet. At 37 miles from the Oliver Hazard Perry, that Akula is not even on their radar, not even on their sonar screen. It's just not there. So that's where you really get into the philosophical issues. Now, if the U.S. has like a choke point. They have been known to lay barriers there to monitor things coming through. But again, they know where they want to look.
Mm-hmm.
Just going out and tossing sonobuoys into the water is really the last thing they want to do. Having talked to a P8 guy, he says nothing is more frustrating than attempting to throw a buoy field out there and then drop explosive echo ranges just to see if you can get a detect. It is not very effective and can be a little expensive when you consider how much our sonobuoys cost.
Yeah. If I can add, Chris, the same barrier tactic works for formation defense. What they will do is they will say, we don't care about submarines outside this area. And if they're in front of us, they're already going so slow that they won't detect. But there's a sector on either side of a formation where submarines would have to maneuver to get into firing position. And you can lay a barrier across that, knowing that they'll be a little bit noisier than your average creeping boat, and lay a barrier there, and you might catch them. And they will patrol those barriers. And of course, they lay successive barriers as the formation advances. Meanwhile, for the creepers in front, you got dippers going out and looking for them. It's an integrated approach. And of course, this assumes that you've got a formation with enough aviation assets so you can field multiple aircraft.
So since you have the Sakula doing 15 knots, let's make the assumption it got sniffed up by SOSUS. Okay. What SOSUS gives you is an ellipse, if you're lucky. A possible, it's called the SOSUS probability area. And depending on how far away it is and how well the noise level is, you can get a fairly good sized chunk of real estate that you have to search. You might even get a whiff on speed. So let's say that the Akula is just so happens to be in the center of the probability area. So you would have an area both along its line of movement as well as perpendicular to it. You would have a range shift in regard to the sensor. So you would try to come in, and your spot there isn't a bad one. You would try to come in, and then you would lay, quote unquote, a pattern. Now, in this particular case, I would probably use every single last DIFAR buoy I had.
Excuse me.
And you would, you're talking with a 53 Bravo, which is what I assume this thing had. You're talking 1.8 nautical miles normal range. Yeah, let's talk it's 1.5, because the Akula is -3, you get a +1 for 15 knots. So you're talking about 60-70% of max range or base range. So you can lay 2 lines of sonobuoys. The first one would be like 8, followed up a few miles further back by a line of 7. And
like a double line formation.
Yeah, 2 line. And I would have the Seahawk monitor the front line, and then have the Simpson monitor the back line through the ARQ-44 with the SQQ-28 system. Because the Seahawk can only do 16 buoys at a time, and it's got to cycle through them. So this way you could have the Seahawk watching the most likely, the front end, and then you have the ship monitoring the back end. Once you get a whiff on one of those buoys, you just go straight to die-cast. And once you get an active range, then you don't even bother with MAD. You just go right in. Now, if you want to stay completely covert, if you will, then you get a DIFAR hit. You'll probably, if you only get 1 buoy, you're going to have to go to die-cast because you don't have enough to do a MAD run. If you get 2, you can do a MAD run.
And then taking that into the localization, but you just took it into localization. But to obtain a fire control at that point, what would your tactic be at that point? The MAD would.
The MAD gets you a good solution. So does the diecast.
Okay.
It depends on how long you want to be chasing this guy before you're certain you want to expend ordnance on him. I mean, if he's far out, like this guy is, he's certainly not in torpedo range. You could take the time to passively search with MAD, try and get, most ASW operators would not drop on the first MAD pass. They confirm for a second to make sure that it's a valid target. On the other hand, if he's close, if he's almost in torpedo firing range, screw it. I'm laying a box pattern to die cast, figuring out where the hell he is quickly and dropping on him.
Well, then, yeah, this is probably not the best depiction here. I'm assuming the Seahawk probably would be much closer to its pattern, right?
Oh, yeah.
Well, it's got to be within 40 miles.
Right.
Okay.
The beauty of helicopters is they can be anywhere they want,
right.
Much quicker than any surface or subsurface unit.
So, but you've got 100-mile range on the data link back to the Samson, and you've got 40 miles where you can receive the sonobuoys. And that's really not a line of sight problem. It's the fact that sonobuoys have really wimpy transmitters. I think they're like a watt, so they don't have a lot of oomph. But in this case, with the two lines, I would actually watch the guy come through the first one. I would have a really hot buoy, and if I could pick him up on the second line, that's when I would drop probably 2 die casts on either side, and then lock him up and just drop a torpedo on him.
Okay, very good. This has helped me a lot, honestly. Yeah.
Well, the Russians, for example, like I said, they assign a space of water. And they send an aircraft out there, and it lays monstrous sonobuoy fields. Like if you have a 50 nautical mile by 50 nautical mile chunk of water, that's huge. The Russians will put, if we talk a Type 75, a Bear F Mod 3, it's going to drop 24 buoys in that area just to try to give them a chance that they're going to detect somebody. It is completely foreign to really how the U.S. and NATO and other Western-based, how they do things. And when you think about like a BM-1, you say something, Sonny?
Chris, what's a BM-1?
That's the IL-38 May sonobuoy. That's their passive omnidirectional buoy. That is a threshold buoy. It basically tells you I have a contact by triggering its radar transponder. There's no processing involved on the aircraft. So they throw these things all over. That's why an IL-38 in search mode carries like 200 buoys and no weapons. And they lay buoy patterns far enough apart that they can fly between them and look for a transponder saying, over here.
So before you mentioned that the Seahawk would monitor the front line there, and Simpson would monitor the back line of the buoy pattern. But how many can they monitor at one time? Seahawk could monitor all 8 of those, right? It has
Seahawk could monitor 16 buoys.
That's what I thought. Okay.
And the SQQ-28 can monitor 8.
Yeah.
But the reason why you'd want to do that is it allows the operator to focus on one geographic area. If you separate them, even though he can monitor them, he's got to remember, okay, is it that way or that way? Which buoy am I looking at? And this way, he's just knowing, I got this front group here that I need to be aware of. The ship's got the back. I'm not too concerned about that. And that way, you've got 2 guys searching for this beast instead of just one.
horribly naive question, but how do you keep track of that? How do you keep track of in the Seahawk the exact position of these sonobuoys in when they're floating as well, right? I mean, they're
that's yes, up until what we call, I think, Gen 6 or 7 that have GPS receivers in them, you don't. You know where you think you know where you put it. This is why Jezebel and Julie didn't work very well. The early active explosive echo ranging, they didn't know where the buoy was. So they weren't too sure where the contact was. And so we kind of walked away from that. The Russians have a different approach. But yeah, the location is the field of where you thought it was, not where it really is. And it does cause complications. The way I kind of handle that in the rules is I don't. We just give you the fact that if you've got a GPS based sonobuoy, you get a bonus in your localization or your fire control solution die roll. Because otherwise, do you really want to keep track of 50 buoys and which way they're moving? Really? No, you don't. You really don't. If the early computer games are any indication, the computer doesn't want to do that.
All right, so we do have some questions that showed up as a result. I am going to stop sharing. It's pretty simple.
Okay.
Let's go back, make sure I get this. Let's start with this. Which naval SITREPs, if any, have data on current Chinese ASCM and sonobuoy type systems?
Sonobuoy type systems, none.
Okay.
ASCMs, there's a few in the 50s where we've run Chinese scenarios, and YJ83, YJ12, YJ88, those are in there. I don't remember off the top of my head which they're on, but they're in the 50s.
Yeah, well, you've got there's a free index to all the SITREP articles that's available at the War Game Vault. Chris wrote a very good article back several years ago about the Eagle Strike system, the Eagle Strike series, the YJ88, 83, etc. Cleared up a lot of misconceptions. Don't necessarily go with the first thing you find on the web. But yeah,
that's a presentation we have on our website.
Yeah, that's true. And that's we treat that as ground truth. And like I say, there are Chinese ships and scenarios in earlier editions of the SITREP. We're updating a lot of the information, and of course, that stuff is all in 4th edition standard, so it will need some conversion anyway. But it's a start.
Yeah. So here's another question. Let's see. How much does consideration of convergence zone affect the decision to deploy sonobuoys?
That is not a dumb question. It actually drove early sonobuoy systems against noisy Russian nukes. If you look at a November or a Victor 1, which are not particularly quiet, LOFAR buoys were put upwards of 15 miles apart, and they were expecting convergence zone detections. Now, the problem is, if the guy's moving fast, you're going to get multiple convergence zone detections, which really makes your localization a pain because you don't know if he's at 30 miles or 60 miles, and it's a reasonable distance that you just can't, even a helicopter takes a little bit of time, or a P3 takes a little bit of time. But as you get to quieter and quieter boats, this concept of CZ is, well, not very useful.
Got another quick question here. Would the sub know it got dropped on?
You mean with the sonobuoy? Probably not. Probably not. If you dropped an active, yes. If you dropped a torpedo, yes. But no, it's really hard. The sonobuoys are relatively small. You're talking your standard ones, like what, 10 to 15 kilograms. I mean, that's a little bitty pebble, and it's retarded.
Yeah, it literally just goes sploosh in the water, and you're not going to hear that.
Nope.
I mean, we have, I think, rules in there for submarines being able to detect low flying aircraft, but there you're talking four fairly impressive turboprops, flying low, and you got a very sensitive submarine sonar to make that work. So no, Sonobuoys won't happen unless they pay.
The bigger thing also is that it's a very short transient. It goes splash. So even if a sensitive sonar system could pick it up, it's only going to pick it up once, and it's not going to integrate. So sorry, John, don't worry about it.
Just looking through to make sure I didn't miss any specific to that topic. Give me one moment. All right, I'm going to start opening up for just a few general questions at this point. If I missed anything higher up in the comments, we had a lot of questions kind of come in and overlap. So at this point, if you have just a quick general question, go ahead and add it now or re-add it if you don't mind. Let's see, Javi, which one do you want? There's a couple of them here. Let's see. Would it be possible to get the old annexes from Harpoon for 4?
On eBay?
Okay.
And, I don't even have a lot of that stuff. The electronic copies have been converted, and really, I mean, the process of creating Harpoon 5 started involuntarily when we discovered that there were so many changes to the 4th edition rules and annexes that we just decided to call it a new edition.
Your best bet. I mean, I haven't looked. I'll look and see what my records hold. The problem is, if we don't have it in PDF, we don't have it, because those silly software companies keep moving forward, and this discussion about being backwards compatible is, sometimes a lie.
The problem is, we know that there's stuff out there. People want to take the UK, they want to take France, they want to take Latin America, and they want to do all these scenarios with stats, and they're willing to take a loss in accuracy to be able to play by simply using the old stats. But would you rather have our effort going into cleaning up stats and getting out there at 5th edition standard, or gathering up all this old dated stuff and getting it out to you?
As you can see here, Javi kind of followed up, and I think his point is that there's a lot of sit-rep material that refers to the old, the old referencing. So I think
I'll tell you what, Javier, I'll look and see if I've got a PDF of the 4th edition, and then Larry and I can talk about what we're going to do with it, because there's still a lot of data in there that does get transferred over to the 5th. So if I can find it, if we don't have to collate and redo it, then we can probably, with big banners, put it on the War Game Vault for really cheap and just say, this is old, don't expect anything big. But I'll look. But if I don't have it, I'm not going to spend the time to reconstruct it, because a lot of that stuff, believe it or not, was done under something called PageMaker. And I can't open those files anymore.
And I had PageMaker, and I can't open them anymore either. Also, most of our coverage has been of U.S., Russia, and Western countries. The work we're doing on China now, for instance, for China's Navy, is very original and really pulling stuff together for the first time. The last time we really looked at Asia was back when we did Sea of Dragons. And I don't even want to think about how long ago that was. I have to use an adding machine to figure out how many years it was. And I'm dating myself by saying adding machine instead of calculator. We'll see what we have. And I understand people want to play other scenarios besides US and Russia. But if we're putting bad data out there, I don't know if that's a good thing. Chris and I will talk about it.
Yeah, like I said, if we've got it extant, we might be able to do something.
So we'll shift away from Harpoon for a moment here. John Newth had a question of, can you discuss searchlights between the eras? DOB to FGDN is clear, but Bywaters and Shattered Armada to CAS seems inconsistent.
It is. That's because when we didn't go into really breaking out the range of searchlights till Dawn of the Battleship, because golly gee, that's the main night search sensor. And then it flowed into Fear Guide Dreadnought. As we work on a CAS update, and I'm not entirely sure where that is, although this could be a SITREP article too. I can talk to what the 1930s, 1940s looks like, because they're going to be pretty darn close to the same. And then we can pull up some of the nomenclature, designations and specs. The only reason why I was able to do Dawn of the Battleship is because, believe it or not, I found in Google Old Books a searchlight design textbook. And I was able to pull out the big technology differences, as well as some information on acceptable ranges or expected ranges. And then people actually listed searchlights in their ship references. I've got a couple of articles, DOB era, where it's nothing but telling me what every U.S. ship had for searchlights by make, model, size, the whole thing. Once you get to about the 1930s, they're almost ancillary.
Well, in the late 1890s, searchlights were probably pretty high tech.
They were.
Well, they used electricity. Ooh,
So yeah, I can look at clearing up Bywaters War and Shattered Armada and the rest of it. I could probably put together the detection table by diameter, but not by type, because it would probably take me a while to really break that out. But I could look.
October SIDREP, not the April one.
Oh, thank you.
Here's another question from Mark Hitchcock. Over the horizon targeting and the ability to engage at longer ranges. I assume Harpoon accounts for players using this tactic.
Actually, Mark, that was one of the big changes. If you haven't seen SITREP 5859, not to push you to buy more. There's an article I put in there on the Russian targeting systems that specifically looked at over the horizon. Harpoon 5, unfortunately, makes a very strong point. The U.S. does not know how to do it. We still don't really know how to do it. The Russians figured it out in the 70s. And that thing that we often just kind of thumbed our nose at, the Nuchka 1, was a revolution in missile targeting, and we didn't know it.
Chris makes a point in the article that while we concentrated on air defense and as a result produced things like the F-14, Phoenix, Aegis technologies, Russia concentrated on their strengths were already in surface-to-surface missiles, so they developed targeting complexes, which is a term you'll see a lot in the rules, and that optimized their use of surface-to-surface missiles. That was their Aegis.
This was a good one from Connor. I forgot to put this one up, but for realism of play, would it make sense for an umpire to hide the fire control solutions? I like that one.
Yeah, if you really want to be sadistic, Connor, yes.
Yeah,
they don't really know, and it's going to drive them crazy, which is
having the referee role for the fire control solution is diabolical and deprives players of one of the main reasons they play war games, to roll dice. I don't get to roll my own dice. What the hell kind of a system is that? And
it's kind of like the move silently rule in D&D, right?
Connor, here's how I've done it like this in the past, where I want to deny the player total control in the die roll. Is you make up a table that's not in any particular order from 0 to 9, and you scramble it, and you let the player roll 1d10, you roll the other one secretly. So in the meantime, they're going, oh, I got it. I got a 5. I must have done great. No, I'm sorry. You did shit. And it drives them crazy. And it really gets it to the point that miniature gamers have far more information on their playing table than they have any right to have. They have an idea of where the guy is, which isn't even close. We rarely put in all the interfering contacts, which just, adds a bunch of noise to the whole problem. And we really break it down so we can play the game, quite frankly, in a reasonable amount of time. But by simplifying the environmental situation that way, people think it's easier. And I've had naval officers, we've had senior officers off Aegis ships going, it ain't easy.
The problem is that miniatures are designed to give players a grasp of the spatial relationship between the different units, which is necessary for gameplay. But that is the one thing that in an actual situation you probably don't have.
So good segue into this next question.
Okay, yeah. We've actually talked about what's called the referee's guide, which would have a general section or a general book that applies to all Admiralty Trilogy games because the mechanics are the same. So things like how to do hidden movement, how to resolve interfering contacts, and that sort of thing. And then a section that talks about basics of tactics, which would have to be era specific, because Dawn of the Battleship, you really want to hit somebody, you got to be about 2,000 yards away. In Harpoon, the guy could be 200,000 yards away. So the space time thing becomes a real driver for tactics. And that's why we'd have to do it on a era specific level.
We've
thought about it.
I'm sorry. Yeah, we used to have one. I don't know if it's out of print. I don't know if it's available on eBay or not. And it was the Cast Referee's Guide, and it had information on how to set up stuff, and a tactical guy like Chris is talking about is something we'd love to do. We just haven't had the time.
You just muted yourself, Peter.
Sorry.
Could we see a slight return to the large caliber guns on ships? I would like to see that. I mean, we had a perfectly reasonable 8-inch gun in the Mark 71. They put it on a ship that it should never have been on.
I talked to a guy on Hull, and when that beast was mounted on the bow, by the way, I walked by Hull and she was fitted with that thing. That's how old I am. And there was not a lot of room on that forecastle. He said when that thing went off, all the lights went out.
So, I mean, I'll be honest with you. One of my favorite concepts, Javier, is that I don't like big guns. They take up a lot of weight, and then I got to have this magazine thing, and we don't have any protection on our ships. I mean, the hull plating's maybe a half-inch thick.
Keeps the rain out.
Basically. Keeps the water out. So one of the things I've been pushing towards, just because I can put a bunch of them on, is I've been looking at larger diameter mortars. Because everybody's going big and fast. And I'm going, what's wrong with medium and slow? Because
explosive.
well, on top of that, with rocket-propelled mortar rounds and GPS, I can make one hell of a beehive round that would just eat small boats up like no tomorrow. there'd be tomato paste all over the place when those things went off. And then you could also use it for ASW and shallow water. You could use it to blow up things on land. It's a multitasker. I love it. If you ever want to see something, look at the Swedish Amos mortar. They put it on a speedboat, for God's sakes. It's 120 millimeters. I think that's twin barreled, I think. That is a really cool system. I mean, we could go up to 150 or even 180 millimeters, and boy howdy, I could make some real chaos with that thing.
It's one last question here from Mark. It was already covered. Apologize, but interested in information on the plan for modern day Pacific scenarios, South China Sea.
We're working on it.
Mark, that makes a carbon-based life form. Okay,
that segue
project.
That segues very well into we're kind of at the top of the hour. How are products moving along? What can we expect?
Well, we're really pretty good along on China's Navy. Peter Grinding has done a really good first swipe through. We spend a lot of time deconflicting information that's out there, and trust me, there's a ton. But we've got the ship types laid out pretty well. I've gone through sonar, and I basically went through the Western sources and just tossed the whole thing out the window. I've grabbed what I could out of China. I've actually really leaned heavily on some Russian sources in their hydroacoustic histories. So we've got that pretty well laid out. And I'm working on radars, which we have to add an awful lot, both the really new ones and then, of course, the really old ones. But I'd say we're about 75% done to a draft.
It is our front burner project. We're basically tying up, filling in gaps, looking to complete stuff. Basic ship classes are done. Guns are done. As a matter of fact, this article that this next issue of the SITREP has a detailed article on Chinese gun systems, which certainly expanded my knowledge of the topic, and I think is very useful. Just to help players get an understanding of Chinese weapons technology. It's mostly foreign, it turns out. We've got some stuff that we've discovered in terms of how the Chinese were able to build so many ships so quickly. They cut corners here and there. And once we're going with a slightly different technique than we did with the first two books, which was where I slapped them together and then we passed them around until everybody was happy and then we published them. This time we're chewing on the data first so that all the numbers are good before we put it into print and then send it out for review. So at that point, you're just worried about whether all the tabs are lined up instead of about whether the data is good. That should speed up the actual publication process once we finish the research phase. But that is our front burner project. Along second burner right now is the High Tide update, which is going on. We're in scenario development on that. Some of the old Convoy stuff is coming out because there were a lot of Convoy games. Chris has found some data link stuff that affects that Kola Peninsula mini game in the annex or the appendix. So we'll have some limitations on Soviet air defense that were not there before.
Yeah, there's a couple of good websites that just go into the historical development of their air defense command systems. And they show these diagrams that tell you what fighters they can talk to, how many fighters they can talk to, which SAMs they can talk to. And they're not necessarily interdependent. One air defense system can't necessarily talk to the other if it's newer, but the newer can always talk to the older. So it's a very interesting amount. I think I've identified at least 4 generations of air defense command structures. They're probably well into their 5th right now, but it is really, there's a lot more restrictions than we originally thought.
Are there any? Is there any parallel work going on with some of the older scenario books, like South Atlantic War, etc.?
Oh yeah,
yeah. That's we've got a stack of stuff that we're working on. And if I can do a plug right now, we have been absolutely amazed with the information we've been able to get out of a couple books by a guy named Mariano Ciaroni. And I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing that improperly. I did a review a little bit over a year ago, of a book called Carrier at Risk, which was an excellent book about the Argentine efforts to defend Venta Cinco de Mayo during the Falklands War. And he had a lot of detail in there. He had actual Sonobuoy patterns laid by the Argentine aircraft as they were patrolling, trying to look for the UK submarines. Now, he just came out with another one, and I love this title. Go Find Him and Bring Me His Hat. And that was the title. That was the order given to 2 British frigate commanders by Admiral Sandy Woodward to go find this Type 209 that they thought they had a sniff of. But talking about Sonobuoys and MADs and everything, Ciaroni has a table of over 100 ASW prosecutions by location, date, weapons dropped, etc., all on false targets. None of the British ASW prosecutions were on real submarines, even though they were getting MAD, even though they were getting search subs and dropping weapons. There was nothing there. Meanwhile, the Argentine submarines were trying to find the Brits and weren't having a lot of luck with that either. So you got these 2 guys out there punching in the dark. And Ciaroni goes into the reasons for it and operational details. It's just an amazing. And all that's going to go straight into the South Atlantic War. That's what he's working on next.
There's a third book that's related to it on the Skyhawk squadrons out of Argentina.
Yeah.
You want to talk about some absolutely brave individuals.
Oh.
I mean, these guys, a lot of them knew they weren't coming back because they were at the ragged edge of their range. They were dropping, dumb bombs, and they had to fly through the teeth of the UK defenses. And while Sea Dart wasn't all that impressive, Sea Wolf was nasty.
And there were also plenty of anti-aircraft guns. There's nothing wrong with the British Mark 8 114 millimeter, 4.5 inch. So they, the Skyhawk guys get full props.
Now, the other things that we're doing is that Larry and I have realized that there's way too much data for both of us to try and scrape together. So we've put together a couple of teams of people we have dealt with for many years to start working on a French supplement and a French naval annex. And we have a couple of people working on what we call NATO North and NATO South, which will be all the NATO navies with the exception of the Commonwealth. That one's on Larry's and my to-do list. So we're trying to push Harpoon 5 data development a lot faster because this is the quickest way to get stuff out there for people to start playing with. And if we can get a scenario book, like the French guys are going to do a scenario book as well, then we'll do it. But for right now, we're looking more at data production than we are scenarios.
Harpoon players have always grown their own scenarios. That hasn't been a real limitation for them. So we figure give them the materials and they'll build their own.
I open the floor for any last-minute product questions. Let's see if we get any last pings here, but probably close up. Otherwise, any last-minute questions from the crowd? All right, I think we will close up. Thank you very much, Chris and Larry, for attending and offering your input on everything.
Happy to do it.
Yeah, thanks, Peter, for setting it up.
All right, no problem at all. We'll hold another one, I hope, soon, but we'll schedule that
Yep.
All right.
Well, sure. We're going to try and make this a regular thing.
Absolutely. Thank you all very much. And
All right.
thanks to the
Thank you,
crowd
Peter.
too.
Take care.